All right, so that is the actual management tab. You then have agents, which you should be familiar with at this point. That just displays your active agents. In this case, for some reason, it's not displaying it. So I'm just going to log out again and log back in because I think there's an issue with my cookies. All right, so I just logged out and logged back in, and you can see that in my case, because I've already added an agent, it's displaying it here. So once you add an agent, this is the page that will be displayed, and you'll have all the other agents essentially displayed here. So it'll display the ID, the name, the IP address, the group, the OS, the cluster node, the version, the registration date, and of course, you then have the status, which tells you whether it's alive or whether it's inactive, meaning it's either been shut down or there's something wrong with the agent configuration. All right, so that's agents. And then, of course, you have tools where you can essentially access the API console and a rule set test. Under security, you have the ability to create other users. You then have roles, policies, and roles mapping based on your organization. And then, of course, under settings, you have the logs, miscellaneous, modules. So if you click on modules, this will show you all the modules installed for Wazuh. So in this case, you can see that security events is installed, integrity monitoring is installed, Amazon AWS is disabled. That's perfectly fine. So this is for the auditing and policy monitoring. You can see configuration assessment and automation for the compliance monitoring using SCAP checks. That's disabled. You can also enable the virus total module, which will essentially generate alerts resulting from virus total analysis of suspicious files via an integration with the API, which is fantastic. And you can then enable OS query to essentially expose an operating system as a high-performance relational database. This is really not that important. But you also have the ability to set up the Docker listener to monitor and collect the activity from Docker containers such as creation, running, starting, stopping, or pausing events. And of course, you have your regulatory compliance modules there. You then can essentially import some sample data if you want to learn more about how to use it. But again, that's really not necessary. The current settings, I would recommend leaving them as they are because they're really configured very well at to begin with. If we take a look at logs, these are all the logs here generated by Wazuh. So looks like we had a few errors, but everything's running now. And then of course you have the miscellaneous options where you can run the health check and about. All right, so those are the settings. Now let's get into agents and let's talk about deploying a new agent. So I can deploy a new agent. And you can do that directly from your actual dashboard. So if I click on Wazuh here, or just open that up and click on Wazuh, I can click on total agents, and then in your case, just click on deploy a new agent. Now, based on the operating system, so it could be Red Hat, CentOS, Ubuntu, Debian, Windows, or macOS. You can select the actual operating system that's running on the host that you'd like to monitor. So in the case of Windows, because this is very important, it'll give you a PowerShell command that you need to run that will essentially download the Wazuh Windows agent, and then it'll configure it with your the IP address option. So make sure that you specify your Wazuh IP address. So make sure you copy this value here and replace it here. So just make sure you replace the IP there, and then you can add it to a group. You can say default. In our case, we created the Linux servers group, which is okay. And in this case, we can select Debian Ubuntu, and this is going to be x86, x64. And this command will essentially get it set up for us, right? And then you can start the agent using the actual init system that's installed on your version of Ubuntu. So in this case, we can use systemd. So we can say sudo system control daemon reload, enable Wazuh agent, and start the Wazuh agent. So I just wanted to explain one thing in regards to the actual, in regards to installing the Windows agent. So I would typically not recommend using the PowerShell command here. Instead, I would recommend if you go back to Wazuh and you click on, so if you're on the web page here, you can click on install Wazuh. And then for the agent, just click on Windows, right? That's going to open up another window here. and you want the GUI option. So this is the Wazuh Agent Manager. You can download the actual executable from here. So there's the Windows installer. Once it's downloaded, I'll just switch over to my Windows VM and show you how that works. So I'm back on the Windows VM or Windows system. Under my downloads, you can see I have the Wazuh agent for Windows. So that's a setup file. Just double click on it and go through the installation wizard. Once it's done, you will be provided with the Wazuh agent manager. So this is, you can see mine is currently registered. So in your case, just enter your Wazuh server IP. You don't need to enter the authentication key, and then just hit save. And then click on manage, and you can then click on start, stop, restart, or the status. So you can see mine is currently running. I can stop it or start it, etc. Right? And if you click on view, you have the ability to view the logs produced by the Windows agent itself. And you then have the actual configuration for the agent itself. So this is also very important. It's very similar to the configuration, the Wazuh configuration file. So let me just see if I can zoom in here so you can actually see what's going on. Just click on font, and I'll just make that 16 there so you can see what's going on. So again, these are just options pertinent to the agent itself. And in the case of Windows, you firstly have the actual notify time and the time reconnect, which is set to 60 seconds. So that's set by default. The one option that I would recommend that you change that could be disabled based on your own system is going to be under, let's see, do we have it under the system inventory? No, that's not the option there. Yes, that is OS query, right? So you can essentially enable OS query here. So you can set that to no if you want to enable it. That's if you enable OS query on the Wazuh server, otherwise it's not going to work. So yeah, that's pretty much all that I would change there. And then you can just hit manage and reload. So once you do that, you should get a connection back from the agent on the Wazuh server. So let me just switch back to my Kali Linux VM. All right, so that is how to set up the Windows agent. Now we're taking a look at how to set up the Linux agent. So I'll say x86, x64. I'm adding it to Linux servers. I just need to copy this and then follow the instructions here to start the agent. So this will ensure that it runs on system startup. So what I'll do here is let me just go back into my Linodes, and I'll click on Ubuntu server, and I'll just log into the server. So this is the Wazuh server. So I'll say SSH root, and I'll paste that in there. So there's the IP. Just going to hit yes, and provide my password. And there we are. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is I just want to make sure I update my repositories. So sudo apt-get update and sudo apt-get upgrade. That's going to upgrade any packages that need to be upgraded. So there we are. That's going to upgrade everything so that we are working from a clean slate. And we'll give this a couple of seconds. All right, so the packages are upgraded. I'm just going to go back into Wazuh now, and I'm just going to copy the command that'll essentially download and install the Linux or Debian agent. Make sure that the IP has been set correctly and the group has been set correctly. So I'll just switch back over into my terminal, paste that in there, hit enter. That's going to set up the Wazuh agent. There we are, that's done. And then of course we can just reload the daemon. If you are running on an Ubuntu or Debian system that uses init or sysv as the init system, then you can specify the sysv init options there. So what we're going to do here is we're just going to say sudo system control daemon reload. So sudo system ctl daemon reload. Okay. And then we're going to say sudo system ctl enable Wazuh agent.service. That's going to enable it on startup, and then we need to start it. It should be started, but we'll just start it. So instead of enable, we'll now say start, and we'll give this a couple of seconds, and it should be registered as an agent. So if there are no errors here, then everything should have worked out just fine. So there we are, and then we can check the status to see if it's running. There we are. So it's loaded and active. Fantastic. So let's go back into this page here. So that's done. So we should get another agent. So I'm just going to reload this now. And after a couple of seconds to a couple of minutes, we should get the call back from the agent, or from that system that has the agent running. In this case, it's the Linux system. There we are. Fantastic. So we can see that we get all the information related to this particular system. We get the actual host name, the IP, the actual group we added it to, the operating system, and of course its actual status. Okay, so we can then click on an agent, which is what I wanted to showcase now. Now, when you click on an agent, and this is very important, this is information displayed pertinent to a particular agent, right? So you're going to have this little toolbar at the top that will allow you to cycle through, various dashboards that give you information related to security events, integrity monitoring, SCA, system auditing, vulnerabilities, MITRE ATT&CK, and if you click on more here, then you can essentially access the regulatory compliance options as well. You can see right now it looks like it's performed a scan already, but let's get started firstly with the security events, because that's the dashboard. So you can see that right now, do we have any security events? It looks like there are a couple of security events. Very interesting. So in this case, the actual agent ID filter is set to 002, which is very important. So the filter option is important because it allows you to select a particular agent. So if I click on filter and say agent.id, in which you can also use the IP if you want. So I can say if add the agent ID is 101 or 001, which is the Windows system, 002 is the Linux system, 000 is the actual Wazuh manager server that we set up on Linode. So we don't want that, but yeah, you have the ability to set up your own filters. In this case, the filter is set correctly. So the dashboard will display the alert group's evolution. So in this case, you can see we have some SSH alerts, invalid logins, authentication failed, syslog, and SCA. So these are color coded. You can also, specify the actual time in regards to what you want displayed, with when you're talking about security events. So right now it's showing the last 24 hours, which is perfectly fine. And at the top here, you'll have the total amount of events. Level 12 or above alerts are set to 0. Authentication failures have been set to 12, which is interesting. And authentication success, which I guess was us. And then at the bottom, you have the top 5 alerts and top 5 rule groups. And of course, you then have the top 5 PCI DSS requirements. And at the bottom here, you have your security alerts, right? Now, the awesome thing about this is you're going to see that they're going to have the actual time column, the MITRE tactics or techniques in this case, and then the tactic and the description, the level, and the rule ID. Okay, so in this case, we can see that it looks like there was an attempt to log in as a non-existent user. If we click on the MITRE technique here, it'll actually display that and tell you what it pertains to. So in this case, you can see credential access. So adversaries may use brute force techniques to attempt to access accounts when passwords are known. So okay, so you can start to see how this is useful now, because it's essentially telling you what's going on. However, if you click on this little drop down, this will give you more information regarding this particular security alert. So in this case, we're not really interested in the in these top options here. We're interested in the actual MITRE ID, which is provided us here, and then it tells us the log here. Interesting. So it looks like we have our first security event, and to be fair, to be honest, guys, this is real. This is actually real. I'm not kidding about. I haven't performed this attack. It looks like this user performed it, and we can take a look at the time here. They performed it. If we take a look at that here, it should actually tell us the time at the top. But either way, it tells us, that this was performed on the following date at 5:59. All right, and the user was Katarzyna, or whatever that is. But that is very interesting. So it looks like this server has been, or really has actually gone through a brute force attack, which is absolutely insane. Indeed, it has. So you can see Cynthia here. So it's coming from localhost. Yeah, that's correct, and disconnected. So if we click on page 5, These are all CVEs. Let's click on the last page here. If we click on this one here, we can see that these are just security alerts. Yeah, these are not relevant, but we can essentially, if we click on the level, we can essentially display them from the highest. So these are already CVEs because the vulnerability detection option was enabled, but it looks like they are CVEs that affect this Linux server. Very interesting. So we can see that the CVE here is CVE 2021. Yeah, this is this is a quite a modern CVE here, or vulnerability. If you click on the rule description, that should display it here. So this is, we can actually perform research on this. If we click on the rule ID, that'll tell you more about this particular rule, right? So in this case, this is part of the vulnerability detector, and it'll give you more information regarding this particular vulnerability. So it is critical. Interesting. So if we go back a step, which is what we wanted to do, or we could just go back into agents and then click on the Linux agents once again. So I'll click on it here, and this is the main dashboard, right? So it looks like our system is actually being attacked, which is so insane to think that this is happening live without me even scripting this, which is actually kind of cool. So yeah, the point I was trying to make is you can actually see that's increased. So this server is actively being attacked, which I'll get to in a second, right? So, and there's only been one successful authentication here. So if we click on that here, you can see that this was this us? I believe it could have been us. I'm not really sure. Because the actual date configuration on the server is different than my time here. So yeah, but that's very interesting. So, I'll just get rid of this filter here, and we can take a look at the security alerts displayed here. So this looks like it's the latest one. So let's take a look at what user they try to log in as this time. So Eli. It actually looks like the servers are getting attacked quite a lot, which is very, very interesting. I wonder if that's the case for this particular, for the actual Wazuh manager, which is very interesting. So, if I go back into the actual dashboard here, or rather if I go into modules and I click on security events, and I can get rid of that filter because I don't want to, can I get rid of that filter? Not really sure, because if I click on events here, this will display all of the events. I'll get to that in a second, but yeah, let me just go back into my agents for a second, because there's something I wanted to highlight that I didn't. So I'll go into, we have taken a look at security events, right? So the dashboard displayed here, as I said, we've already gone through that. But you can see that based on the color coding, if you can customize that if you want. But yeah, there is a brute force, an active brute force going on here, and it's getting that log from the actual auth log on the Linux system. So under var log auth.log, which is kind of scary. So Ibrahim looks like he's trying to gain access. Pretty crazy stuff, right? So as I was saying, you can also click on the events tab, which will essentially just display the events without any visualization. So give this a couple of seconds, and you can see that you can also sort these based you can sort them and essentially sort them based on ascending or descending values if there is a value. But you can see we have all of the actual security events being displayed here. And yeah, so it looks like this is a brute force attack. So because of the MITRE module, we pretty much know what the attacker is doing. So this is where threat intelligence comes into place, and this is where you learn about attacks, which is actually fantastic. I really didn't script this because we're going through a real-time attack now. So I'm going to show you how we can defend against this attack. So so that's events, which I've already talked about. You can also add other available fields here. So for example, I can add all available fields that might be useful in this case. So, I don't really see one here, but we can also add the geolocation. So I can add that there, and this is going to add it to the columns. And in this case, there we are. Looks like we actually see that, yeah, they're performing a brute force from different countries. Very interesting, very interesting. We're learning more about our attacker. In this case, it looks like they failed to log in as, let's see, what user did they use here? So that's the actual rule ID. Failed to use FTP1 user. Okay. Very interesting. Okay, so yeah, that's essentially the actual events page. I'm just going to go back into localhost here. And that's the Linux system, which you can rename on the Linux system itself. You then have integrity monitoring. So this essentially allows you to, again, as it says, perform integrity monitoring. I can't even spell that correctly, but if you click on inventory, this will give you an inventory, as it says here, of all the files on the system. So you can essentially search for one, and then under events, this will tell you whether a file has been changed, etc. So what we can do to stop this brute force is by going back into our configuration here under management and configuration, and we want to modify the configuration, and we're going to add an active response rule because as I said, Wazuh actually has incident response or intrusion prevention, if you will. So yeah, under here, I'm just going to add a new line. So I'm just going to say active response. And that's the syntax there. Fantastic. So we can then say command and we'll also require. So what we want to do is we can say firewall drop. Let's see, firewall drop. And because this is on Linux, so that's the command there. So firewall drop. We can then say location. Location. Let me see if I can type that in correctly. Location. And we'll leave this as is for now because we still need to fill that information in. We then need the rules ID. So when a rule is triggered, then this comes into play. And then we need a timeout. So the timeout we can set, to maybe timeout. Let's see, timeout. I actually believe I know where that other session came from. That was probably from the Lish terminal, which I should have actually known. The timeout we can set to maybe 1,000 seconds or 10,000 seconds. But yeah, that's how to add an active response or how to add, an incident response rule based on a particular intrusion. So before we do that, if I click on, let me just go back into this here. So I'll open that up in a new tab because I need to identify more information here. I'll just get rid of that for now. This is really weird. It keeps on running the checks here, but I'll just go back into agents. Yeah, I clicked on my agent here. So we go into security events. It should tell me whether there was a successful authentication attempt. So authentication success, that looks about right here. So let's look at this one here. This was the earlier one where the login root. Yeah, that's with PAM. That makes sense. Yeah. And we have another one here. Does it also display the actual IP? So the agent IP, the manager name. If I click on this here. Okay, yeah, so that looks good. Either way, in order for us to block these types of attacks, what I was looking for, if I go back into the Linux agent here and I click on security events and we click on this right over here, what we're looking for is the rule ID, right? So the rule ID is 5710. Okay, so we know that now. So we want to set the rule ID to 5710 and we can then set the location to local. Okay, so let's actually see if this works. Okay, so I'm going to save this and I'm then going to restart the manager here and we can get rid of that window there. And let's see if this actually works. So yeah, I'll give that a couple of seconds to restart the manager. All right, so I've restarted the manager and if we click on this here now, you can see that, yeah, in terms of the MITRE card that's being displayed, the top tactics look like credential access. We also have a few priv-esque ones. That's very interesting. Let's click on that tactic here. So the technique here, so that's a PAM session. Yeah, okay, so that makes sense. Privilege escalation. Defense evasion. What did we do there? Is this the same thing? Yeah, that's still PAM. Using the PAM module for authentication. OSS. Okay, yeah, so that looks fine now. Persistence. Did we do anything? Yeah, that's still the actual authentication there. Right, so if we go into security events, let's wait on this to load up. We can see it's still under attack. I want to see if the rule that we've set up is actually active. So that's for the brute force attack. We can see that this is still being performed. And the user is Jacob or whatever that name is. So let's actually see whether this is working, right? So the only way to test it is to sort of, I'm just going to, if I say who here one more time, I just want to make sure I close up the Lish session. And let me just exit. And, you know, I can try and ping that target. So instead of saying SSH, we can ping it. And let's see, because I'm running this from another network or from another external IP. Okay, so I also want to see if that is actually noted. Okay, so let's try and say SSH. Actually, I want to try and log in with another user to simulate a brute force attack, which I can do with Hydra, but I'm not going to do that now. So test, hit an incorrect password, hit an incorrect password there again. Okay, let's see. It should actually tell me that authentication failed. If it hangs like this, then it means there's something going on, or that actually did work. So let me just terminate that again. Yep, looks like it works. Looks like that defense rule or that reactive rule works. Okay, so fantastic. So that's active response. So that's how to respond to an attack. Let me just refresh this here. Boy, we still have a lot to talk about, but it's good that we actually went, you know, out of our way to see how to do that. So let's see. How many authentication failures have there been? Attempt to log in as a non-existent user. Was that us? No, that's Oracle. No, that is done. Interesting. Let's see. We should have our attempt here. Our attempt being logged here. There we are. So that's test. I think the attack should cool down now. So the only way we'll know that is let's see whether they're, because I know their IP addresses are changing, but based on what we specified, you know, that should actually work. Looks like we have a few attempts there. Okay. So I don't know whether that's still being blocked. Okay, but I think that's another IP. So it's going to reduce it, I guess. But you know, we can customize that based on our own parameters. It really doesn't matter. As I said, if we take a look at the configuration here again, and we see that active response configuration that I set up. Let's see if I can find it. No, that's all the way at the bottom. Give that a couple of seconds. There we are. So active response. So that was firewall drop. The other ones that we have here, firewall drop. Yeah, that's correct. So timeouts are allowed. So firewall drop, local host. That's the agent there, because I do know the location might be an issue. Yeah, so I think that looks fine. So again, if I know we set it to 1,000 seconds there. So if we try and log in here, it looks like, yeah, we do know that the attackers are using other IPs, which is why we're still getting other authentication attempts there. And, you know, we can also, if we click on events here, then we should be able to add the geolocation to see that change occurring. So this was, let's go into the geolocation location. I believe, was that added there? We can just add the city name there. Yeah, for the other ones, it doesn't look like we're getting that. That's very interesting. This was us, definitely. yeah, if we click on that there, we should see that this was indeed, that's still BIOS. That's very interesting. PAM. Yeah, okay, anyway, we know that we specified the options correctly, but it looks like the other alerts being generated here, because I know the SSH. Anyway, let me talk a little bit about filtering, because we can also filter this here. So rule groups, we can also add another filter if we want through the actual search functionality. Or we can just use the filtering option here. So in this case, we can look for the ID. In this case, what we're looking for specifically is the rule ID. So we can say rule.id and say is, and we specify the value as 5710 to only show those attempts. So those are the brute force attempts. So let's save there. And that should actually reflect. So it's currently loading. There we are. So it's only displaying those ones now. Very interesting. Okay, so we can refresh that. And okay, yeah, so that's going to take a couple of seconds. Is that another user? Probably another user, but I think we've slowed it down. I think we have slowed it down. Yeah, it looks like. So we go back to the dashboard. Authentication failure. Yeah, that's going down, but we want to get rid of that filter. That'll give us the accurate picture. Yeah, so I think we have been able to mitigate that attack, but just again, as I said, this was totally unscripted. This just goes to show you how you can do that yourself, how you can actively respond to a particular attack. As I said, there's multiple other options that you can use. So again, I'll just show you this one more time because I think it's very important. But if I click on management and let's go back down there, management, configuration, and we can then move along. Because I wanted to highlight vulnerabilities. So edit configuration, and let's take a look at that active response. Not really sure where I specified it. There we are, it should be here, there we are. Okay, so these are the active responses available. So by default, you can see that this one is global, which means that, this is for whitelisting. You can also disable an account if you want. You can restart Wazuh. Firewall drop is what we used. You can also use the host deny option there, which is fairly similar. So, and you can also do this for Windows as well, if you wanted to as well. But yeah, in our case, we were able to do that. We can probably increase the timeout if we wanted to, but hey, I think we're wasting too much time on that now. So let's go back into agents, and we'll click on the Linux one here. And what I wanted to focus on was the actual vulnerabilities. So if we click on localhost and we go back into integrity monitoring, I know that this shouldn't have logged anything yet, but even though we created another user. So I'll go back into modules, and that took me back into agents. So localhost, and we click on SCA. All right, so this is very important. This is the security configuration assessment, right? So as it says here, this is using the CIS benchmark for Debian Linux 10. So this document provides a descriptive or prescriptive guidance for establishing, essentially establishing compliance for this particular Linux system. So you can see the current score is 38%. So what does this mean? This is essentially the equivalent of auditing your system with Linux. So it performs an audit, right? A security audit, and it tells you that all of these checks failed, right? So it's pretty much giving you recommendations as to what you need to do to increase or improve the security of this system, or to harden it, if you will. So if we click on the second page, let's look at a few important options, because I know these are not really that important in the context of security. There we are. So ensure sudo is installed, that is passed. Ensure the sudo log file exists, that's not done. So you can start to see from this information being displayed, you can actually learn a lot about how to secure a system regardless of the operating system, as I'll show it for Windows as well. If I click on export, I do know that this usually has an error or an issue, but there we are. you can actually export it as as an actual CSV sheet. And again, this will also be displayed under events, but the filter is essentially applied accordingly. So you can see these are the CIS benchmarks here. Let's go back into that agent there. And we were talking about system auditing, which is what we did, I believe. System auditing events. That's not yet given us any output, which is fine. And then we have vulnerabilities. Okay, so this is the vulnerability scan or vulnerability detection, where it essentially scans the system, on which the agent is installed, and it gives you, it sorts it based on critical severity, vulnerabilities, high severity, medium, etc. So if we click on high or critical, if you will, you can see that we have the following CVEs. So as I said, you can learn more by clicking on the events tab there. So these are the vulnerabilities here. So if we click on it, you can see that the agent IP is provided there. The data vulnerability CVE version is there. Ideally, would look for criticality. So it's a 9.8, which is pretty crazy. The attack vector is network, and then you can perform research on this, right? So an issue was discovered in klibc before 2.0.9. Additions in the malloc function may result in an integer overflow and a subsequent heap buffer overflow. Yeah, so really, really useful information. So we can go back into the dashboard, and again, you can then click on the inventory here to essentially display the actual vulnerabilities and or the CVEs that affect a particular package. In this case, it looks like it's mostly it's mostly BusyBox that is being affected, but yeah, that's the vulnerability page. If I click back on it, which I'll do right now, you can see that the dashboard gives you, visually displays the data so that it makes sense, right? And you can see that you have the most common CVEs, the top affected packages by CVEs. In this case, libmount is critical here, and then we have all of the other packages there. So fairly simple to understand. Let's go back here to our dashboard. We then have MITRE, right, which is the last thing I wanted to focus on, which you should have an understanding of right now. So this is where threat intelligence comes into play, as I said. So you can see on the dashboard, it tells us that pretty much the attack that we're dealing with right now is a brute force attack. And this tells us the same thing here. You can see it's credential access, right? And in this case, it gives us the type of alerts. In this case, they are brute force attack alerts. And the same thing it does here, brute force, brute force. So we know what the issue is. And of course, you can expand the actual range here. So in my case, I'm showing the last 24 hours, and you can get the same information from the events. The only difference is here, as you'll see from the columns, is you'll actually get the MITRE, the MITRE attack ID. That's the tactic ID, and then the actual name, and you get it right over here. So the rule level is 5, and rule ID is as follows. So based on the actual settings that we had set up, we would not be getting email notifications regarding this because this is fairly common. We would, however, be actually, all of these would be logged because they're above 3, right? The rule level is above 3. So yeah, if you take a look at the framework here, you can search for, this is really awesome. You can actually search for specific tactics and their techniques. So, we can see in our case, it looks like we have a few issues with brute force attacks, and then it gives you a description and it tells you, when the last one was. So yeah, pretty cool stuff. So that's the MITRE attack module. As I said, there's the other options here in regards to regulatory compliance, but we're not really interested in that at that point. But this is the dashboard that you'll be provided with. So it essentially contains the MITRE module. You then have compliance. In terms of FIM, you have the recent events, and then you have the the last scan performed in regards to providing you with guidance for establishing a secure configuration posture there. And then of course you have the events count, the event count evolution. So this gives you a sort of like a trend as to when, you know, and the graph is fairly easy to understand. You have the count here, and then you have the actual time at the bottom. So it tells you, you know, when you're experiencing the highest amount of attacks. So yeah, fairly cool stuff. If you click on stats here, you can see that in this case, let's take a look at it here. Yeah, that just displays the stats for that particular agent there. So, you know, you can pretty much tell where most of the events are coming from. So active responses log, auth.log 93. And in this case, it looks like the events pertinent to the active responses log. So it looks like it is responding correctly. So our rule or the active response configuration that we set up is working correctly. Messages sent 903. You get the idea. Okay, so yep, I think that's what I wanted to cover from that perspective. I also wanted to show you the Windows agent because you know, I completely forgot about it as we were dealing with a brute force attack, and I know this video is way over where it's supposed to be in terms of duration, but you can see that this this system is vulnerable. And if I take a look at the security events, I performed a few attacks on it. I added a new user just to show you how that looks from an internal perspective. You can see right over here, user logged on. That was me. You can actually tell that from the time. There's an error event there, win logon success. That's because I actually logged on. And then I know I created another user here. So let's just take a step back here because that was actually logged. So there we are. I created a user here. And you're pretty much getting all of these. Events, which is very, very important, right? And of course, you can click on the events page, and you know, you can add additional fields based on what you're looking for. As I said, this makes much more sense to explore in the context of the Linux agent because it's currently under attack. So we have much more data to analyze. So if we go to security events, let's take a look at our threat surface at this point in time. Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. I know that's really high at this point, but it looks like they're changing their tact. So in this case, the high alerts are pertinent to, I think, the CVE. So if we patch this, then, you know, we should be good in regards to that. So if we clear this filter here, you can see authentication failure. And what we can do is let's click on events. Let's perform a little bit of analysis here. And you know, what I can do is we can also add a filter here to limit it by the rule ID. So I'm just going to say rule ID, and we're going to say that is 5710. Okay, and I'm just going to hit save. And ideally, I would like to know where the attacks are coming from. So as I said, that can be obtained by clicking on the available fields here. So we can add the geolocation location. Guessing that gives us, let's see, yeah, that's latitude and longitude. So I'll get rid of that there because I really don't need that here. What I want is the geolocation city or the country. Yeah, that will be very useful in our case. So let's add that there. Yeah, that's definitely where you'd expect it to come from. So, you know, you have Russia, etc. By the way, this was me. I know that this was me here because that's Kenya, unless we have an attacker from Kenya. Yeah, that's test. So, yeah, I think the attacks have actually slowed down because apart from those ones there, we had a couple of other ones, but it looks like they're switching IPs, which is why we're still getting brute force attacks. The only good thing in our case is the fact that they are being blocked. And what we can do is I can actually show you how to also view the response alerts or events, if you will. Yeah, so as I said, if you get rid of the filters and you click on the events, you can actually see the active response rules here, or events, if you will. So you can actually see the host blocked this particular IP address or this particular attempt. So we do know that it works. With that being said, you know, we've covered quite a lot, and you know, this exercise has been very fruitful because I didn't expect an SSH attack at this point. But yeah, thank you very much for watching. I'm just going to switch over back into the slides. So if you have any questions or recommendations, or if you had any issues with this video, you can take a look at the slides provided to you, or you can reach out to me and the HackerSploit community on our Discord server. The link to that is in the description section. If you want to register for part 2 of this series, you can also access that by clicking the link in the description, and you can access part 2 for free. In the next video, we're going to be taking a look at how to perform intrusion detection with Suricata. So I'll be seeing you in the next video. I just want to take a couple of moments to thank our Patreons. Thank you, Michael Hubbard, Dustin Umpress, Jerry Speds, Doozy, Sid Saab, Ryan Carr, Shamir Douglas, Jojo Bibi, Palangos, Kushkev, RS, Nino Buikov, and David Bricker. You guys are really awesome. Thank you very much for supporting us, and you guys make these types of videos possible. So we really appreciate it, and we look forward to producing even more high quality content.